Hello, my people. It's your Negro with APTitude and host of the BLACKboard, Mickee Lee. How y'all doing? I hope your week is off to a great start. Hey, while I'm processing the video for Money Mondays that for whatever reason is taking forever, it's been processing over an hour and a half now, which annoys me to all get out, but I will get it up for you today, one way or another. In any event, I thought I would use the time to continue reading in Black Theology and Black Power. If you have seen the first part of this, which is the preface that I put up just a few days ago, then you know that Black Theology and Black Power was written by Professor Dr. James H. Cone. And Professor Dr. James H. Cone was an American theologian, and he was best known for this breakout work, which was first published around 1966, 67, I think maybe possibly 1969. Yes, 1969. It was first published, and it was a breakout because he asserted that there was, number one, a difference between Black theology and white theology, and thus a difference between Black Christianity and white Christianity, which we well know to be true. Second, he posited that the validation that Black Christianity and Black theology were just as valid as their white counterparts. Third, he stated that Jesus Christ was in solidarity with the oppressed of the earth. And we know this to be true from the various accounts of Jesus going to dinner, for example, with Levi, who became Matthew, who was the tax collector, also known as a publican in the Bible, and they were hated by the Jews, and I don't think they were too well liked by the Romans either, but these were generally Jews who were hired by the Romans to collect the taxes from the Jews that were due to the Romans. So the Jews hated them, not only for the fact that they were collecting taxes, much like we view the IRS today, but also because at that time, the way they made money, the way they made their income was not being paid a salary by the Roman public, apparently. Maybe they were. I'll have to do a little more research, but for sure, they also added to the tax. They added like a commission or a fee. And so the people were paying already an astronomical amount in taxes to the Roman province, and then their own people were using them and collecting a fee on top of it for the privilege of collecting the taxes. So that's one reason why Matthew was hated. And when you check out the Gospels, you'll find out, of course, that Jesus, was hanging out with the tax collectors. He was hanging out with the common men and women, some of which included prostitutes. Many people were liars. People were deaf, dumb, and blind because of generational curses or because of things they had done to themselves. So, because of family curses or things they had done themselves. James H. Cone was very much correct when he was saying that Jesus came to represent the oppressed. And as Jesus himself said, he came not for the well, but for the sick. Not for the righteous, but for the sinner. Now, that does not mean that that no one is sinless. That doesn't mean that there is anybody who is sinless. It merely means that there are people who do not recognize that they are sinful. There are people who do not recognize that they need a savior. And that was the same then as it is today. Anyway, with this landmark work, Dr. Cone set the stage for Black theologians to, number one, say that, hey, we have our own view of the Bible based on our traditions, based on our culture, and based on our experience. And we don't need you, white people, to interpret the Bible for us. And as a matter of fact, what we come to understand from the Bible is just as valid as what you understand. And we would say even more valid because we are the ones who are carrying you morally. All right. So that's why this is a landmark book. And I really want you all to read it. It is available in PDF version if you absolutely cannot afford it. But it is available for like $10, $11, $12, all over the internet. And especially these days, you may be able to get a Christmas deal. All right. I read the preface, part of the preface to you, and we're going to finish up with the preface in this video and get ready for the introduction. So in the first part of the preface, I've gone over the key points that he was making, that he, based on his theological training, which was the backdrop of which was all white theologians, and then he had a problem mixing the white theology with the black suffering. And so based on his experience as a black man from the South who went to the North and found out the Northern whites really weren't any more welcoming than those in the South, then he finds himself in, one black person, one black man in a sea of white theologians who want to talk about Christianity but really don't live it. And so this book came out of those observations. And at the same time, the Black Power movement was reaching a crescendo. And even though one of his favorite people was Martin Luther King Jr., he also found himself drawn to Malcolm X, to Stokely Carmichael, Amiri Baraka, and other people in the Black Power movement. And his goal was to use the gospel as power for the Black Power movement. And that's much the same as the purpose of my channel. I believe that the gospel of Jesus Christ has all that black people need to fight our oppressors, and also to be renewed in the spirit of Jesus Christ. I believe that black people, in particular N.W.A.s, but definitely the blacks of the Americas, and then stretching out to the Africans, I believe that we are the greatest people that God ever made. And it's not just for artistic abilities. It's not just for our beauty. It's not just for our athletic prowess. And nobody hardly ever gives us credit for all of the inventions that we have made or improved on. But until recently, we were the moral compass of the United States. And to the extent that I know of Afro-Latino history or Afro history in the Americas, in Latin America and in the Caribbean, we were moral leaders in those lands too. And we have taken a deep dive in the last 40 years, especially here in the United States. And I believe it's a dive that only can be corrected by submission to Jesus Christ, really getting to know his word for ourselves, and then asking him to be our vanguard, our banner, and our shield in a way that no other group of people has. Now, I'm not trying to change the gospel, because the gospel tells us that in the last days he's going to show up and show out for those folks in Israel. And that is the country of Israel, not the quote unquote black Hebrew Israelites. That said, I believe we are a chosen people too, chosen to handle all of the dirty work, all of the heavy lifting, all of the shouldering and fighting for true justice, unifying mankind under the banner of Jesus Christ. White people don't do this. White people I don't think they're able to do it as a collective. I believe that black people were uniquely built and have been infused with a special DNA by Jesus Christ himself, by God the Father and the Holy Spirit. But in the last 60 years, our proximity to our oppressors, the integration of our oppressors. And when I say our oppressors, I don't just mean quote unquote white people. I'm talking about the spiritual elements that run amok in the world, largely through white people. But as we are finally opening our eyelids and discovering the anti-blackness, there's really no such thing as racism. It's the anti-blackness runs just as strong in non-white, non-black groups as it does among white groups as a collective. All right. This means anti-blackness is the same in Asians, in so-called Latinos, in Native Americans, in all these other iterations of so-called people of color. The anti-blackness is prominent and pronounced, and it's no different than their quote-unquote white counterparts. All right. So in order for us to really operate as I believe God intended us to do, we need to understand the Bible fully for ourselves, and we need to be bold and courageous in declaring it through the lens of our experience and what we alone have been able to do as a people that all other people don't want to do, don't seem to be able to do, have not done, which is be inclusive of everyone, fighting for the justice and equal treatment, equal good treatment of everyone. All right. So anyway, that's my additional parts on the preface. We're going to continue now. And as I said, those were the key points that he made. And as I read complete reading the preface to you, I'm going to add in a little bit of my thoughts. All right. Continuing. An example of the weakness of the 1960s Black freedom movement is defined by Black Theology and Black Power was its complete blindness to the problem of sexism, especially in the Black church community. When I read my book today, I am embarrassed by its sexist language and patriarchal perspective. There's not even one reference to a woman in the whole book. With Black women playing such a dominant role in the African American liberation struggle, past and present, how could I have been so blind? Now, y'all, I want you to understand that I'm reading from the 1989 re-edition of this book. So it was first published in 1969, then it was re-edited and revised slightly and published in 1989. Now here we are in 2020. Has anything changed in the so-called Black community or in the Black church? No. Black churches are simply indoctrination camps for Black women to learn how to be quiet, shut up, but all at the same time handle all the dirty work, handle all the heavy lifting, instead of expecting provision, production, and protection from our quote-unquote men. We are to learn how to deal with excuses, whining, backstabbing, treachery, vitriol, and out maggot brain thinking. There's nothing has changed in the Black church. And this is the reason why we don't have a Black community, because Black women are indoctrinated from birth to perform, to rise to excellence, to shirk off all of the pain and all of the disappointment and all of the violence that comes towards us, so that we can stand by our quote-unquote men and so that they can be a leader. Well, you can't make a leader out of a lemon head. And this is not to, say that every Black man is this way, but let's be real. It is for the majority. If you have half of the Black men locked up and a large percentage of the other half is on the streets, do your math. All right. But I'm glad that he noted this out, that he noted this. But just as back in his day, when he first wrote this book, and is now, it is Black women playing a dominant role for the African American liberation struggle. And frankly, Black women, I think you need to sit down. Okay? Everything we've done has been to support Black males. What that has done is, instead of them being in awe and inspired to stand up, get up and keep up the fight and, tag team, let's handle this, or go on out in front and you handle it yourself, no, it has, resulted in them despising us, and the vitriol and hatred so many Black males have towards Black women is no different than their white counterparts and their other non-Black counterparts towards Black people. It's no different. Anyway, The publication of the 20th anniversary edition tempted me to rid Black Theology and Black Power of its sexist language, as I did in the revised edition of A Black Theology of Liberation, and also to insert some references to Black women. But I decided to let the language remain unchanged as a reminder of how sexist I once was, and also that I might be encouraged never to forget it. It is easy to change the language of oppression without changing the socio-political situation of its victims. I know existentially what this means from the vantage point of racism. Whites have learned how to use less offensive language, but they have not changed the power relations between blacks and whites in the society. Because of the process of changing their language, combined with the token presence of middle-class African Americans in their institutions, it is now even more difficult to define the racist behavior of whites. And here we are, another 30 years later, and this is still apropos, still accurate today. Because now, as we get ready to embark on 2021, not only do they have Africans to replace black folks, they have so-called people of color. And we have ignorantly signed off on this crap, which means that all of these people get the resources that belong to us, get the success infrastructure that belongs to us, and white people get to say, I don't know what you're complaining about. We have black people in our organization. We have colored people in our organization. Our organization is inclusive. Of course, we know that means inclusive to everybody but ADOS. And the problem then is ADOS, having lifted up and carried the banner of all these other so-called colored people, find themselves with no allies. Continuing, this same kind of problem is beginning to emerge in regard to sexism, with the recent development of womanist theology as expressed in the articulate and challenging voices of Dolores Williams, Jackie Grant, Katie Cannon, Renita Weems, Sherry Gilkes, Kelly Brown, and others. Even African American male ministers and theologians are learning how to talk less offensively about women's liberation. Many seem to have forgotten that they once used exclusive language. Amnesia is an enemy of justice. We must never forget what we once were, lest we repeat our evil deeds in new forms. I do not want to forget that I was once silent about the oppression of women in the church and the society. Silence gives support to the powers that be. It is my hope that by speaking out against sexism, other male African American preachers and theologians, especially in the historic black churches, will also lift up their prophetic voices against this enemy of God in the black church community. So far, too few of us have spoken out about our own denominations. No, you haven't. You haven't spoken out. In fact, the indoctrination 30 years later is more strong today than it ever is before. That's the reason why you have black women running around with weaves as a natural part of their lives, wigs as a natural part of their lives, overweight and burdened with emotional trauma, physical trauma, verbal trauma, mental trauma, and even spiritual trauma as they fight to hang on to a God who does not seem to care. And believe me, I struggle with this almost daily. I struggle with it almost daily, wondering why everybody else's God works for them, but ours doesn't seem to work for us. But in any event, if black males were not so weak-minded and so far away from the gospel of Jesus Christ, and if they actually recognize the power that is in the gospel of Jesus Christ, they would understand that God has called black men to a far higher standard that could ever be reached by any other group of men on the planet. Because black women have never been a threat to black men, but black men are. Okay? And if this community is to rebound, if we are to survive what's coming, if we are to make it as a group into eternity, the males of the group must grow into manhood, and that manhood must be on the foundation of the true message of Jesus Christ, which is love and respect and co-rulership. It is not based on submission, especially when the man demanding the submission has not himself submitted to the only king, which is Jesus Christ. Continuing, Black theology and Black power is also limited by the Western theological perspective that I was fighting against. After spending 6 years of studying white theology in graduate school, I knew that the time had come for me to make a decisive break with my theological mentors. But that was easier said than done. I did not know much about my theological tradition, which had given rise to my rebellion. I was struggling to become a Black radical theologian without much knowledge of the historical development of African American religion and radicalism. I had studied a little Negro history in high school and college, but no text by a Black author had been included in my theological curriculum in graduate school. This was one of the things that made me so angry. I had been greatly miseducated in theology, and it showed in the neo-Orthodox Barthian perspective of Black theology and Black power. Hey, we've all been greatly miseducated. Continuing. How can you call what you have written Black theology, African American theologians pointedly asked me, when most of the theological sources you use to articulate your position are derived from the white theology you claim to be heretical? Your theology, he continued, is Black in name only and not in reality. To be Black in the latter sense, you must derive the sources and the norm from the community in whose name you speak. That criticism was totally unexpected, and it shook me as nothing else had. I had expected my Black brothers and sisters to support me in my attacks on white theology, but it seemed to me at the time that they were attacking me instead of our enemies. In time, however, I came to see the great value of their criticism. My efforts to correct this cultural weakness in my theological perspective has been an ongoing process since the publication of the Spirituals and the Blues in 1972. As I began to reflect more deeply upon my cultural history, tracing it back to the African continent, I began to see the great limitations of Karl Barth's influence on my Christological perspective. Barth's assertion of the Word of God in opposition to natural theology in the context of Germany during the 1930s may have been useful. But the same theological methodology cannot be applied to the cultural history of African Americans in the Americas or to Africans and Asians on their continent. Of course, I knew that when I wrote Black Theology and Black Power, but my theological training in neo-orthodoxy hindered my ability to articulate this point. As in 1969, I still regard Jesus Christ today, remember he's speaking in 1989 now, 20 years later, I still regard Jesus Christ today as the chief focus of my perspective on God, but not to the exclusion of other religious perspectives. God's reality is not bound by one manifestation of the divine in Jesus, but can be found wherever people are being empowered to fight for freedom. Life-giving power for the poor and the oppressed is the primary criterion we must use to judge the adequacy of our theology, not abstract concepts. As Malcolm X put it, I believe in a religion that believes in freedom. Anytime I have to accept a religion that won't let me fight a battle for my people, I say to hell with that religion. All right, I must interject my thoughts here. He said, God's reality is not bound by one manifestation of the divine in Jesus, but can be found wherever people are being empowered to fight for freedom. That is not true. The Bible tells us that God's only begotten Son, his only manifestation in the flesh, is Jesus Christ. It further tells us, no man cometh to the Father save the Spirit draw him. So first of all, God must send the Spirit to draw the person. The person has the opportunity to say yes or no. If the person says yes, the Spirit becomes indwelled and helps the person becomes a follower of Jesus Christ. Now, let's take a look at some of the wars of some places that we know are war zones in the world. Let's take, for example, Vietnam, Cambodia. Those people over there largely are not Christians, and I'm talking over 90%. So Jesus is not going to be there because there are very few people that are open to the gospel of Jesus Christ there. That does not mean that God himself is not active in human activity, is not arranging human activity, is not involved in human activity. But it is a mistake and completely wrong to believe that Jesus is manifested in the Vietnamese conflict. Now, the Vietnamese were fighting themselves. The Vietnamese were fighting the French. The Vietnamese have fought the Cambodians, vice versa, so forth and so on. You have a little bit of tribal conflict. You also have, though, people who spoke the same language, read the same language, basically worshiped the same gods in conflict with each other. So not only was Jesus not there, they weren't fighting a religious war. Okay, let's go to the Middle East, where most of the people are Muslims. That is not, again, to mean that the activities that occur in the Middle East down to each individual person are not being orchestrated or not being, that God himself does not involve himself with these activities. But it does mean that Jesus is not there. The wars in the Middle East are over who should be representing Allah, the Sunni Muslims or the Shiites. And this is based on who they think who has the rightful heir to Muhammad, to the Prophet Muhammad. Is it the familial or bloodline relatives that he had, or is it the theological, religious followers that he had? That's basically what those conflicts come down to in a nutshell. So I vehemently disagree with Dr. Cone, and there's more to support my position from the Bible than there is his. Continuing. Another weakness of Black theology and Black power was my failure to link the African American struggle for liberation in the United States with similar struggles in the Third World. If I had listened more carefully to Malcolm X and Martin King, I might have avoided that error. Both made it unquestionably clear, especially in their speeches against the United States government involvement in the Congo and Vietnam, that there can be no freedom for African Americans from racism in this country unless it is tied to the liberation of third world nations from U.S. imperialism. Again, I must interject my thoughts. Now, I understand where Dr. Cone is coming from. This imprint of looking to care for other people is one of the reasons why I vehemently assert that we, ADOS, are a chosen people too. That we, JDOS, BDOS, CDOS, all of the Americas, all of us Negroes in the Americas, that we are a chosen people too, but in particular, ADOS, we are the most influential Black people in the world. This imprint of taking care of other people, of shouldering their burdens as if though they are our own, this comes from the Lord himself. This is my belief. You can look all throughout the Bible, and it is clear that to handle this, to be this way, generation after generation after generation, this is more of a supernatural thing than it is natural. We're so used to doing it, we don't realize, or we're very slow. We're just now realizing that other people don't do that. Then we can look at present day United States, where for the last 40 years, we've had a huge influx of African immigrants, very few of whom ever integrate with American Blacks. Now, they may do it while they're at college, but once they get out of college and start their professional careers, which are usually at the expense of an ADOS person, They cling to their ethnic groups, and that's pretty much it. You can look in New York. You can look at in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, where we have a lot of Eritreans and Ethiopians. And I can guarantee you there is very little interaction between N.W.A.s and these groups. They barely speak on the street. If they do, that's pretty much it. You're not going to their homes. You're not going to their festivals. You're not going to anything. But when a job calls for a black person, they will show up. And they will say, I'm a black person. Okay? So we can tell right now that our 60 years of tying our fight and our struggle to all these other so-called colored people has done nothing but us give away the resources that belong to us alone. Now, I'm speaking in the earthly realm right now, and I'm just speaking basic good sense. You may want your neighbor to do well, but once you observe that your neighbor is not doing well on their own home turf, what kind of idiot are you to open the door to your house and let them run amok in your house? Okay? Now, let me speak on the eternal realm. Because we continue in the position of the permanent underclass, of the permanent failing group, of the permanent hated group, of the permanent undesirables, we are losing our grip on our faith, which was the one place we were winning. The Bible tells us this world will pass away, and only those who can continue in their faith, who endure to the end, will be saved. We must understand these occurrences that we are living through as orchestrated events backed by Satan in using humans to carry out his plan. I believe we are the most hated, not only because there may be a curse upon our people, but we are the most hated because we have some special DNA, spiritual DNA that God gave us that he didn't give others. This is my firm belief. And as I read the Bible, I am more and more entrenched in that belief. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about this is there are still people who are pushing this Pan-African, or as I say, scam Africanism agenda. We are supposed to have the CBC, which is the Congressional Black Congress. Now, I've done a video on this, and they are not the Congressional Black Congress. They are the Congressional Black Carcass, because they are a dead, stinking, putrid body that should have been moved out of the way a long time ago. The African Union barely makes progress in Africa. But guess what? The Africans have a Congress, a congressional Congress, a caucus rather. They have an African caucus here in the United States pushing for them to get resources, and they're getting it when N.W.A.s is not. So where's the Pan-Africanism? Let's continue. You can't understand what is going on in Mississippi if you don't understand what is going on in the Congo. Malcolm said at a Harlem audience. I love Malcolm X, interjecting my thought. I love that Malcolm X, but he was wrong. He was wrong then, he'd be wrong now. Although I think he would have changed his mind. Going on. They're both the same. The same interests are at stake. The same sides are drawn up. The same schemes are at work in the Congo that are at work in Mississippi. Interjecting my thought. Yes, this is true. But here's the difference. We are willing to embrace the Congolese and share with them. They're not willing to do that with us, even on our home turf. Moving on. During the last year of his life, Malcolm traveled throughout the Middle East and Africa as he sought to place the Black freedom struggle in the United States into an international context. When African American leaders questioned the value of this international focus, Malcolm said, "The point that I would like to impress upon every Afro-American leader is that there is no kind of action in this country ever going to bear the fruit unless that action is tied in with the overall international struggle." And again, I interject, he was wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. Moving on, Martin King shared a similar concern. Against the advice of many friends in the civil rights movement, churches, and government, he refused to separate peace and civil rights issues. His condemnation of his government's involvement in the war in Vietnam, referring to America as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, alienated many supporters in both the white and black communities. Well, this just means that America is not the Christian nation it is telling everybody it is. Continuing, Martin King contended that the black freedom struggle and the struggle of the Vietnamese for self-determination were tied together because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Interjecting, while I agree with that, the issue is the Bible tells us to test every spirit by the word. And while we should work towards justice, there is nothing wrong with making sure our issues have been repaired and justified first. And especially when you can see the people that you're working with aren't really your brothers and sisters, but more like leeches and parasites. Then you might work and understand that the justice that you acquire for yourself may wind up spilling over to acquire justice for them, and we shouldn't hate on them for that because they are God's creatures too. But it does not mean that we should continue to put justice for ourselves and reparation for ourselves on the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th burner, thinking that these people think like we think, and that if they get a foothold, they're going to help us. We've had 60 years plus to understand that's not the way they think. Moving on. Let's see. My failure to link black liberation theology to the global struggles for freedom contributed to my blindness regarding the problem of classism. Class privilege was and is still a dominant reality in the white community of the United States, as well as in the African American community. The truth is, interjecting, it is a class issue throughout all of the communities, but the focus is still black and white in this country, and that's something that black folks need to break out of. In fact, the problem of oppression in the world today is defined not exclusively in terms of race, but also in terms of the great economic gap between rich and poor. Rich and poor nations, and the haves and the have-nots within these. Again, if I had listened more attentively to Martin King and Malcolm X, I might have seen what I did not see at the time I wrote Black Theology and Black Power. Both turned towards economic issues during their latter lives. They saw the great limitations of capitalism and, while rejecting the anti-democratic and atheistic principles of the Soviet Union, Martin and Malcolm began to search for the human democratic side of socialism. What was clear to both of them and clear to me now is that we need to develop a struggle for freedom that moves beyond race to include all oppressed peoples of the world. As Malcolm X told a Columbia University audience a few days before his assassination, it is incorrect to classify the revolt of the Negro as simply a racial conflict of black against white or as purely an American problem. Rather, we are today seeing a global rebellion of the oppressed against the oppressor, the exploited against the exploiter. Despite its limitations, I hope that Black Theology and Black Power will remind all who read it that good theology is not abstract but concrete, not neutral but committed. Why? Because the poor were created for freedom and not for poverty. All right, so those are his closing remarks in the preface, and I just want to interject a couple of thoughts. First of all, the poor and the rich were not created for freedom and not for poverty. They were created by God's will for his purposes, period. Some people are poor as a result of their own corruption and laziness and poor planning and, generation after generation of poor decisions when they are offered better decision. But the truth is, while that is the truth, there is still the fact that many are poor because of someone else's corruption. So the leaders of their country, their village, their tribe, whatever. Still, all are expected to pursue the same standard of righteousness. Okay, and the Bible tells us what the standard of righteousness is. It's not our standard, but God's. While there would be far less poverty if Christians were actually Christ-like, still, Jesus said, the poor you have with you always. Now, this means that someone will always occupy that space. And it's my belief that someone will always occupy that space because they're used as a testing method. They're used as a testing instrument. How will people who are doing better than this person treat this person? But also, how does the person who is doing poorly, what is his standard? What is his moral? You know, since this COVID crap began, I've been doing quite a bit of outreach on the streets. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of arrogance out there among quote unquote poor people. And it depends on who you're dealing with as to whether the poverty is a result of some unfortunate, unavoidable things happening to this person, or if it's a result of a person who is arrogant in their beliefs about what they're entitled to from the government, what they're entitled to from their family, what they're entitled to from others around you. And you'd be surprised by the level of arrogance that's out there. The last things I want to say is that unlike any of the other quote-unquote oppressed peoples of the world, Black people stand alone in my experience and in my research of people who never have wanted to become the oppressor. Whereas we can look at every single other group that has had horrible things done to them, and somehow they feel justified in their anti-Blackness. So, you know, we carry the banner about Native Americans. 500 million Native Americans were wiped out and blah, blah, blah. Now, if you understood it from the biblical point of view, God really wouldn't have the same viewpoint of this as we do. Because you can trace sacrifices to false gods. You can trace the wars that they had with each other. You can trace mistreatment of one another and even child sacrifice. You can trace these things throughout the Americas. In addition, like I said, worshiping another god, right? And the fact that once the Europeans came, many of the tribes, the reason many of the tribes got wiped out is because they played each other off against the Europeans, not realizing the Europeans were playing them both, right? We can look in Africa and we can see that a lot of the devastation there is not just due to the colonization of the European powers, but because of the corruption of the African leaders, corruption that has gone on for not just hundreds of years, but even thousands. So, but yet when these people come here and we have carried their banner, they're not joining us in solidarity and saying, hey, let's, make a new United States, one in which everybody is included, everybody is respected, everybody has enough food, everybody is educated, to a good standard, and everybody has the opportunity to fulfill all the God-given talents and skills that they have. No, these people promptly come and say, well, y'all are lazy and I don't know what you're complaining about, and the United States is a great place, and y'all just need to get out of the way. Okay, we're the only group that I know of, and even if you take the European immigrants that filled the United States during the 1920s and 1930s, the latter part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, you had Italians that were not considered white people until basically the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s. That hasn't changed didn't change Italians' viewpoint. They were the ones in Chicago throwing, the Italians and the Polish were the ones throwing, and the Irish were the ones throwing stones and sticks at Martin Luther King Jr. And each one of those groups had been vilified and oppressed to some certain level by the WASP. So we're the only group of people who have never tried to be oppressors, except, of course, black dudes trying to oppress black women. And that bullcorn is over with. But anyway, as a group of people, we're the only group that has never tried to do what the oppressor done to us. Let's finish up this preface. For some reason, he had a preface to the 1989 edition, and now he has a preface to this now I'm going to read the original preface. Okay, I know this video is really long, but I hope you're washing dishes or driving or doing something that and that this presentation is very helpful to you and enjoyable to you. All right, the appearance of this book is made possible by the assistance and encouragement of many people. Although I cannot mention all, I must express my gratitude to those persons who participated directly in the bringing of this work into existence. First of all, I wish to express my gratitude to the faculty of Colgate Rochester Divinity School for the invitation to deliver these lectures as a theological fellow, and to the Faculty Development Committee of Adrian College for the summer grant that provided some financial assistance during my writing. I want to thank my brother, the Reverend Cecil W. Cone I, for providing me with office space in his church and for his critical reading of the manuscript. Dr. William Horton, my former teacher, who also took time away from his busy schedule as president of Lutheran Theological Seminary, Saskatoon, I guess that's in Canada, to read the manuscript and encourage me to seek its publication. I must express my gratitude to N.W.A.s, my colleague at Adrian College, who also read the manuscript and suggested many helpful stylistic changes. I am particularly indebted to Dr. Lester Shearer, my friend and colleague in the religion department, who read the manuscript and rendered invaluable editorial assistance. He spent many hours away from his responsibilities reading and discussing the book with me as we worked for the publication deadline. It would be difficult to express adequately my appreciation to Dr. C. Eric Lincoln of Union Theological Seminary. His friendship and professional encouragement have been invaluable to me. Also, special thanks must be rendered to Dr. Lincoln for bringing my manuscript to the attention of the Seabury Press. My wife deserves a good special word of thanks for her understanding patience and for meeting the typing deadline for the final draft. She also provided an atmosphere for my writing by both being mother and father to our sons, Michael and Charles, during my extended periods of absence. Although many persons assisted me in this work, I alone am responsible for the ideas that are set forth. All right, in our next installment, we're going to get to the introduction and possibly chapter 1. Listen, it's your Negro with Aptitude and host of the Blackboard, Mickee Lee. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. I hope also that you will share this video and that you will listen to it. Listen, Black folks, the time is passing rapidly, and while you're worried about whether Trump is going to retain his presidency or whether it's going to be Biden-Harris, it all spells demise for us. And our only hope and salvation is in Jesus Christ. I know our walk has been extremely long, extremely difficult, and you have to pursue it and get renewed in your mind and spirit every single day. But I hope a work like this, us discussing this, will help to break the chains, the mental, emotional, and theological, spiritual chains over us that we need to do things like white people are doing them or any other group of people. No, we need to simply do them like Jesus Christ did them. And again, I assert, of all the people groups on the earth, we have been imbued, well, you know what I'm trying to say, with a special DNA, I believe, that God planted in us, the special DNA to be able to do these supernatural things like carry other people and be concerned, and be to the extent where we put other people before ourselves. We need to stop that, because in the earthly realm, it's not working, nor is it really required from the Bible. Yes, you should be willing to put others before yourself. But again, when you find out that what the people are doing with that service that you're doing unto them is an evil thing towards you, we have the right to firmly, yet lovingly, resist that. All right. Again, it's your girl, Mickee Lee, your Negro with Aptitude, signing off. Have a great night, and thanks for joining me on the Blackboard.